Good afternoon, dear listeners. Today we will talk about things not directly related to the programming. However, this thing is of great importance in writing software and in general in the work of the development team. Before we start, let me introduce myself and say a few words about me. So, my name is Mikolai Karamach, and I am a senior software engineer currently working as a technical team lead for a team of 8 people. I also want to say thank you, Danila, for helping me to prepare this presentation. And let's begin with the history. So let's dive into the first day where digital electronic machine appeared. Such computers occupied entire floors and were not immediately reduced to at least the size of several cabinets. And now let's imagine a whole team of professionals who had to follow its work and program it for desired result. It can take a few days to get success in completing the programming. And what would happen if one of the key employees left for the competitors? How long did it take to replace him? And if the customer wants to change the requirements for desired software, this can lead to a long-term chain of change. Since it was a new industry in which there was no accumulated experience, people constantly faced a lot of following problems. First of all, projects have always overexceeded budgets. It's really hard to estimate how many time or money will be needed to implement some specific task. So the implementation of the project was also exceeding the agreed time. The final software cannot really solve the initial task or can solve it with some specific issues, with a slowing down or instability, for example. Yeah, as a result, we have a loss of quality for the customer. Customers are not really satisfied with that. And for sure, projects are really hard to manage because of the following issues we just discussed. And hence the question of our today's topic arises. What we can do to solve this? And here I want to go to the term software development lifecycle. And software development lifecycle, CDLC, of course, over the years of work, people were accumulating some experience, which allowed us to improve the development process and make it easier, and led to a more guaranteed result in estimated time frame. And here I would like to introduce you the concepts of CDLC. To put it simply, let's say it's some kind of strategy for how the team should approach software development before just jumping into the project and getting the same previously mentioned problems. Yeah, which ultimately leads to the upsetting the customers. So CDLC consists of different phases. For example, it's requirement analysis, planning, product design, coding, testing, deployment, and post-production maintenance. And most often, you will hear such well-known strategies, concrete implementations such as Waterfall, Spiral, Scrum, Kanban. We'll talk about them today in a few minutes later. And the first methodology we will talk about is Waterfall. So Waterfall appeared in 1970. The Waterfall, let's say, was named by Winston V. Royce. Its creator never actually gave the name of Waterfall, yet it stuck to it, and since then no one just seriously bothered themselves with coming up with something better. The roots of this strategy grow from the experience gained in other industries, especially from the factory one. For example, in the automotive industry, let's take a conveyor that takes the car body and send it for a painting, and then for the installation of the interior, and then for somewhere else. So step by step, we don't have to return to the previous one. The process is well planned, clear, defined, and structured. The same in Waterfall, with developing the software. We have the following phases. First one is requirement gathering or analysis, when we need to understand what finally customer needs from us to be implemented in particular program. Then we need to plan how our components will interact with each other. So we need to have some kind of architecture for our software. And for sure, we have a development stage where we just do the regular development, then testing, deployment to the customer machines, and some post-production maintenance. Yeah, as you can see, it's really easy to do, but already here we have some issues. Just imagine the case when the customer will, during the testing, understand that some requirements were missing. from the early beginning, we need to start over again. That's kind of a problem, right? Or the another problem is easy to understand. Just imagine that project have long-term software to be developed, for example, for 1 or 2 years. And when you start doing some development, you see that this idea is really great to implement. This software is having some specific market dedicated for that. But after the 2 years, market can change and we are not able to adapt for that because we have planned for only 1-2 year project. And finally, that software don't have target customers to be used to this. And yeah, here we go to the pros and cons of Waterfall. And the main advantages here is that Waterfall is really simple and easy to understand and use. As well, Waterfall is easy to manage. It's really clear defined stage, right? And it works well with a small project where requirements are very easy to understood and are not changing really quickly. But as well, we have some disadvantages for that. For example, we don't have any working software until the late phase of the Waterfall. It also requires high amounts of risk and uncertainty because we're not really sure if we will need to change the requirements at the later stage. The poor model for a complex and long projects because of that point. It's also not suitable for the project where requirements are changing really quick and fast. It is difficult to measure progress within stage where we don't have working software, as already mentioned. Adjusting the scope during the life cycle can end the project when the customers say that they don't have a budget to start over again from the first stage. Yeah, and the integration is done as a big bang. So at very end, it means that we can skip or miss at early stages some issues that will arise on the later stage. It should be also a problem and the reason to start over and over again. Yeah, and with that disadvantage, it's a really long list of disadvantages, unfortunately. So the experts trying to find a new way of doing the software. So here we go to the spiral. Spiral model enables gradual releases and refinement of a product through each phase of the spiral, as well as the ability to build the prototypes at each phase. So we need to build the prototype. The most important feature of the model is the ability to manage unknown risk when the project is commented. And creating a prototype makes this feasible. So if you're talking about Spiral, what is it? So Spiral combines the advantages of Waterfall with the idea of doing the iterative cycle development. So the focus of Spiral is risk management, and software is developed in some specific iterations, some time frames, for example, 3 or 4 weeks. Yeah, and the iteration consists of following stage. First of all, it's also gathering of requirements, risk identification and mitigation, implementation, testing, reviewing and plan the next iteration for the future development. Yeah, it also brings a bit more sense than Waterfall and having some following advantages over the Waterfall. Lower risk compared to Waterfall, flexibility in requirements, at least some particular level of flexibility. It's also produces working software faster, and you can see some visible result and can show it for the customers. But as well, here we have some disadvantages of doing that methodology because it's a really complex model. It can be expensive, and doing the prototypes at every stage can lead for some money leaks or time leaks. It's difficult to properly manage the time during the phases, and yeah, the risk management complex. Yeah, it's just really hard to do. So here we go to another part of our today's presentation, and let me introduce you the Agile. So the next stage of methodologies is Agile methodologies, which just let's dive in the term of the Agile. What is Agile? So Agile is a mindset. It's not even some concrete implementation instructions, or it's just a mindset. Okay, it's philosophy. So I would like to say that Agile is a way, not a goal. And it's based on the 4 values and 12 principles. You can read on that website mentioned on the slide. And yeah, let me just briefly make you understand by reading the values. Individuals and interactions over processing tools. We mean by this that communication and collaboration with the team and outside the team with other teams is really much more important than having some bureaucracy in communication between ourselves. And for sure, yeah, communication is better than using some specific tools. Yeah, working software or comprehensive documentation. It means it's better to have the working code, not a lot of documentation that is not used or not correct. Customer collaboration over contract negotiation. It means that we need to certify the customer. In some specific cases, we can do better than described in the contract. It doesn't mean that we should not have compensation for what we do, but it's also should be a base, not having so high level the bureaucracy about the contract negotiations. Yeah, and responding to a change of following a plan. It's the main idea, different from the waterfall. So we should be adapted to doing constant changes during the development lifecycle. And for example, you can also hear some well-known methodologies that are implementing Agile. It's a Kanban, Scrum, Lean Software Development, Dynamic System Development Method, Crystal, and Etron, for example. So here we go, and let's start from the first methodology that implements Kanban. So the key features of Kanban, yeah, as already mentioned, it's implementing Agile. Another feature of the Kanban is real-time communication with the team. And yeah, and the last but not least, here is the transparency of work and visual representation on the Kanban board. So if you want to implement and start using the Kanban, we will need some kind of board. It can be a physical stand, it can be a virtual stand, and you can see it on the picture on the slide. So what you can see here, you can see the following columns: ready to start, in progress. In progress also divided in 3 different columns: working, waiting, in on review, and the last one column, done. So what we do, we just create a task, assign it to the person, write description in that ticket, and move it into different columns depending on the state of the current task. It can be also a physical board with some stickers. And let's talk about the principles of Kanban. So it's easy to follow, right? You just need to start with what you do now. Just create a ticket, place it in the correct column, and that's it. As well, one of the main principles of Kanban is agree to pursue incremental evolutionary change, encourage acts of leadership at all levels. But the idea is all about having the visualize of the workflow. You see really who is working on which task, and you should really care about having the task in the correct state. So it's all about the visualize the workflow. As well, one of the best practice I also want to mention here is limiting work in progress. So it's not really a good state when you have a lot of tasks in the progress. It also should most probably mean that some of the tasks are blocked and not able to do right now. You should see what you can do with that task. Maybe you should place it in another column. And yeah, so the idea is to have the constantly workflow with some feedback loops and trying to be improving on that feedback loops. Improve collaboratively. Collaboration with team is also a main part of the Kanban here. And yeah, just let's try to understand which pluses it brings to us. And yeah, as the really easy to understand that the Kanban is easy to use. You just need to have some place where you can write some notes. It can be Excel document, it can be some whiteboard, and you can start the Kanban, implementing the Kanban. Also, Kanban is about the constantly developing, so continuous development lifecycle. As well, you can see that the Kanban is easy to new changes, because if you want to change some requirements to have new task, you just add it into to-do column and start working on that task. Yes, also encourage the collaboration. Reduces the costs because you don't need to care about some manager to taking care about the tickets. The team can work independently. And also low overhead, not really, we don't have to set up some meetings to make it work. Yeah, but as well, we have some disadvantages here. And for sure, we really need some at least approximately stable plans, because if we will have a lot of tasks changing every day, we don't have any progress. We will start working on one story, on one task, and we just need to change it to another one. We will not have any result to show or to see. Yeah, and it's timeless, so we don't have any deadlines. So personally, it can affect some efficiency of concrete person because we don't have a timeline. It's also hard to provide some estimation for the customers because we don't have any deadlines. We're just working on some task. Yeah, and for sure, it's really, in some cases, it can we can have loss of advantages if we will not update the Kanban board properly. Yeah, and the Kanban is really hard to use as in isolation. Yeah, it's just one example of the Agile methodology, implementing Agile, but we can take a look at the second one, I guess most popular from my experience, Scrum. And if you're talking about Scrum, I just want to remind you that it's just a framework for getting work done, where Agile is the mindset or philosophy for that methodology. And talking about the key principles of Scrum. So the first key principle is control over the empirical process. Scrum as well requiring really self-organizing teams. Scrum is time-boxed, so we have like limits of time. Scrum encourages collaboration as well as a Kanban. And the main difference here, I want to highlight the value-based prioritization. So in Scrum, we really want to understand which part of the software we want to develop to bring more value for the customer. So we're really trying to prioritize based on the value. And as well, here we have iterative development comparing to Spiral, for example. As well, I want to highlight some Scrum values. Here you can see on the slide. Courage, focus, commitment, respect, and openness. Courage means that every team member have the courage to do the right thing and work with problems really tight. Focus. So everyone should focus on the sprint goal. Okay, I'm trying already to speak about some more details of Scrum. We'll just learn them in a moment. So everyone should focus on the team goals. Commitment. So everybody in the team, in development team, when working with a Scrum, have some personal commitments for achieving the goals, for achieving some timelines. As well, we're working in teams, so we should have some respect to each other and should be open for stakeholders, for the customers, for each other as well. It's about the Scrum values. And the main question here is how to Scrum. Yeah, how to start implementing Scrum, how to use the Scrum. It's really comprehensive methodology, but it's worth it. So let's start with the Scrum roles. Who is a product owner? Product owner is a person who really know the product, who can really understand the final usage of the application we're trying to develop. So it's kind of a business analyst who is aware of the customer needs, aware of how the development team is working, and can help us to prioritize the work based on the value, as we discussed on the previous slide. The Scrum Master is the person who trying to follow the Scrum process, trying to helping the team to establish the own needs will require during the working in Scrum, etc. And yeah, development team. So software engineers, testers, everybody who participate in development process as well. And here I will start with the Scrum artifacts. So before we go, we just need to set some goals and documents, let's say. So first of all, it's a product goal. What we want to develop, what we want to achieve, some high-level goal. As well, we'll talk about the sprints just in a moment. So sprint here in Scrum is like representation of iteration. If we're talking about iterative development, it means like we're repeating the same procedures like in cycle. So one iteration is sprint in Scrum. Usually sprint takes from 1 week to 4 weeks in Scrum. Normally it would be 2 weeks, I would say. So we should also have for these 2 weeks, for next 2 weeks, we should have sprint goal, what we want to achieve, what we want to develop to show to final customers, to have the working software earlier and yeah, customer satisfied. And definition of done. The last but not least, we need to have some document that will describe what we see as a completed task. How we understand that this task completed successfully or not successfully. Yeah, and let's look at the picture on the slide about the process, how it works. First of all, before we go, we need to set up the product backlog. The product backlog is some kind of decomposition of our product goal, of our final software we want to develop into some particular task. For example, we want to develop a website. If you want to develop a website, let's try to divide it in some particular stages. For example, we want to write a front-end part and back-end part. Okay, if you're talking about the front-end part, let's divide it in some particular task, etc., etc. So this particular task should be assigned for a person, ideally for one person, maybe for a few developers, for example, but they should be decomposed in a good way. And we often call that tasks as stories. So the product backlog is a list of stories based on the value that we can take it just in a word. So yeah, when we want to start the sprint, our 2-weekly iteration, for example, we have special ceremony or a meeting called the sprint planning, where we're just trying to get and to understand how much stories we can take from the product backlog and place it for the current 2 weeks, for next 2 weeks, and we should be able to finish that story. So we should analyze, maybe some of other developers would be missing for some reason, I don't know, wedding, illness, something else. We should commit on this list of stories we will do in the current sprint. Yeah, and also set a sprint goal for sure. Then we go into recursive development, and this would be for next 2 weeks. During these 2 weeks, the best practice is to have a daily Scrum meeting or stand-up meeting, so-called, when all team just gathering together and trying to communicate on the following 3 questions for each team member. Usually it's what I did yesterday, what I will be doing today, and any issues, blockers I have at the moment. These questions help us to understand, do we have any gaps or problems, identify that gaps and solve it as soon as possible. Not trying to see it after the review of the current sprint. Yeah, and after the sprint is over, based on our sprint goal, we should have some increment. Increment is often a piece of software we are able to show for the customers what we did for these 2 weeks, actually. Yeah, and for that we have a special meeting called the sprint review or sprint demo in specific cases, where we want to show what we've done for ourselves, for stakeholders, for other teams who can be interested in our development process, just to show it. Okay, and as we are always talking about the feedback loops, so we need to understand how the sprint was. Is it really good sprint? Or maybe some developers were facing constantly some issues. These issues blocked them during the whole sprint. What we can do with that? For that, we have a sprint retrospective session. This is a special meet dedicated to, for example, for answering mainly 3 questions. What was good in the sprint? What was bad in the sprint that can be improved? And some action points for the next sprint. It's just a basic example of how the retrospective can be looks like. So it encourages some actions from the team, some feedback. So in the next iteration, the next sprint, we will feel better and better. Yeah, and another one, I guess, last ceremony, but not least, the backlog refinement or so-called grooming. It's not described on the picture, unfortunately. This is meeting like on demand. In some specific cases, for example, in case of requirement changes or some new stories are added to the product backlog, what should we do? We want to plan them in, but we need to understand how much time they will take. Or maybe we need to decompose it for smaller pieces. And for that, we have a backlog refinement, just to see what we have in backlog and to refine it. I guess it's easy to understand. Probably let's see it about describing the full process, how the Scrum should look like. But let's see what we have as a pluses of using the Scrum. First of all, as you can see, it's really adaptable and flexible. It's encourage any creative approaches. So you're able to introduce any new idea on the data perspective and ask for implementing this idea later in the next sprints. It also involves low cost, but yeah, it also depends on the team. The team should be self-organized, right? Then it should be involving low costs. Usually it also leads to better quality of work and typically results in more satisfied employees because of the feedback loops. It's also improved customer satisfaction because the customer are able to see the working software faster and see that the team is adaptable and flexible for changes. But as well with Scrum, for sure we have some disadvantages to be discussed. First of all, it requires the use of small teams. It's really hard to scale. It requires experienced personnel. It can be difficult to integrate with a classic project management approach, or it will require a major transformation within the company organization if you want to start using Scrum instead of old project management approaches or Waterfall, for example. Yeah, here I want to say a few words about the SAFe, Scaled Agile Framework. So I was talking about some disadvantages related to the require of using small teams and that the Scrum is difficult to scale. But I would suggest you to read about the SAFe if you want to know more how we can follow the process in the scaled setup. Yeah, and just to conclude, let's compare the main two methodologies related to Agile framework and mindset. So origin of the Scrum is software development needs. Kanban was firstly used in Toyota manufacturing. If we talk about main principle based on Scrum, in Scrum we learn through the experience, self-organizing ourselves, trying to prioritize based on the value, reflect on wins and losses to continuously improve using the feedback loops. Yeah, in the Kanban, generally we just use visuals to improve our work in progress. If you're talking about some regularity in Scrum, we have really time-boxed fixed length sprints, for example, for 2 weeks. In the Kanban, we don't have any, so the Kanban is timeless, we have continuous flow. If you're talking about some commonly used practices in the Scrum, it's sprint planning, generally sprint, daily Scrum, sprint review, sprint retrospective. If you're talking about the Kanban, we don't have some meets, but we have visualized the flow of work, limit work in progress, we have to manage the flow, and incorporate some feedback loops as well, for sure. And we're talking about roles. In Scrum, we have some roles. It's a product owner, it's a Scrum Master, and development team. In Kanban, we don't have any other roles. And just a few more topics that are not going to be part of our today's presentation, but are really worth to be think about. It's estimation techniques. Estimation techniques is about how we can provide some estimation for the customers for a concrete story, for example. We have multiple ways of doing that and why we should choose one or another one. Metrics. So how we can measure that our this software development lifecycle is healthy or not. Is team working efficiency with high efficiency or low efficiency, etc. As well, if you're talking about working in a team, we will for sure have some conflicts. So how we can resolve the conflicts is also another topic that should be taken into consideration. Yeah, and the last one, but not least, engineering excellence. So if you will have ideal software development lifecycle, the customer would be satisfied with how we work. It will be for sure a problem if you will have a really bad quality of final code. We will have some issues, problems, etc. So I would suggest reading some best practice and some patterns in engineering excellence as well. Most probably that's it from my side for today's presentation. Thank you a lot for the attention, and maybe it's time for asking questions.
Yeah, thanks, Nikolai, for a great presentation. I'd like to add something about code quality. We have already had few light talks about it, both solid principle and other principles. You can take a look at light talks. I think they were one of the first. Okay, we have a few questions in the chat. Guys, you can ask more if you want now. Yeah, the first question will be from my side, just why do we need in general some methodologies to develop software? Why just can't a bunch of programmers just sit down and develop something? Why do we create something new?
Yeah, if I be able, I'll go back to the first slides if you don't mind. So yeah, here it is. So the issue would be if you're just trying to rush the software, just sit and trying to do some good code, it would be maybe it would be a code of good quality, but it would be really hard to manage and see. You will be not able to provide some estimations. Just imagine, okay, you have some idea. I want to create a website. I will sit together with you and some our colleagues, and we'll try to develop the website. But first of all, we are missing some requirements, right? We need to understand what we are going to do. If we will just trying to code something, it will not bring the sense for the final customer. So if we're talking about website, maybe we want to sell something with that website, or that website will have some other purpose or goal for that website. So we need to see if our actual implementation will be satisfying the final customer, the final market of that website. And it's really hard to see before you just sit down and trying to analyze the requirements. That's why all that stages are needed as described here, for example. But this slide I was trying to see that you will get all these issues most probably if you'll just trying to not manage your project properly.
Okay.
Hopefully I answered your question.
Yeah, thank you. Just a note, currently our students don't see any slides because we switched to Q&A scene. Okay, another question by our student. Can the waterfall approach be used nowadays? Or, well, I think, is it used nowadays?
Yeah, sure. The waterfall is not the ideal methodology, right? We have a lot of disadvantages, but as well as we have disadvantages, we have some advantages. First of all, maybe in some specific places or organizations, the waterfall is the initial methodology we start using, and it would be requiring a lot of efforts to change it for a Scrum, for example. But currently, team is working already with great performance, with great efficiency, and we don't need to change it. That's the first example. For example, where we do not need to change it for a Scrum. As well as already described, the waterfall is easy to understand. In many cases, for example, guys who were working on the factories for a long time, I don't know, for 20 years in some factories, they have specific mindset, stage by stage, no rollbacks. So maybe for them it would be easy to use the waterfall as well. And the waterfall generally is working really good when we have no change in requirements.
Yeah, something
example,
predictable.
Yeah.
And already known, probably.
Yeah, if you will for sure know that the requirements will be not changed, that's a good choice to use the waterfall for the current situation. Where we have clear defined stages, no requirement changes, it would be easy to manage, easy to implement.
Okay, thank you. And yeah, we have one more question. Guys, just if you have more, please ask them. And also, I'd like to remind you that we have a great Java school, MJC.school. You can study Java there from the very beginning up to Spring, Cloud, etc. Okay, so the last question by now is, do tasks have specific deadline within the sprint, or is the deadline till the end of the sprint?
Generally, we're trying to provide some estimation for a task, and the task, yeah, it's normal case when developer have a few tasks, for example, 3 tasks for the sprint. It means that the first task should be ended before the sprint ends. In some cases, it can be some unknown cases, etc. But generally, the task have some estimation. That's why I was providing some additional topics to think about is estimation. So every task should be estimated at the moment of sprint planning. And most probably it means that you have some deadline for that task. But as well, Scrum is really adaptive to change, flexible. It depends. From my side, I would say if you will satisfy the sprint goal, it's discussable to complete your task before sprint ends or just before the sprint review, let's say.
Okay, and one more question inside this one. How much tasks are usually assigned during the sprint? I think it's per developer.
Yeah, it depends. Really, it depends because every developer have different understanding of the project. Like every project have a different complexity. In some cases, the task can be, okay, I need just to run one script to see the result. If result okay, I don't need to change anything. If you have 10 such tasks, you can do it in one sprint, right? In 2 weeks, just to run 10 scripts and see the results, no issues. But in specific cases, you have some other tasks. For example, the bug. The bug is not really described well or not clear for you. What should you do to fix that bug? And you can take full sprint to understand and solve that issue. So it definitely depends on the business side, what we are developing on the project, let's say, and also on developer as well.
Yeah, and usually just while you work, you are getting better at estimating how much time will you spend at this or that task, and you can just estimate how many tasks you can complete within 2 weeks and just assign them to yourself. Okay.
Yeah, that's why we're talking about feedback loops. So we have a sprint retrospective to understand if the task was estimated correctly or not. Maybe we need to adjust our estimations for the future sprints. And if you have, I don't know, 1 year working the same setup in the same team, you will have maybe ideal understanding of estimations.
Yeah. Okay, guys, I don't see any more questions in the chat. Thanks for joining us today. Thanks, Nikolai, again for your great presentation, and see you guys next week. Bye.
Thank you for attention. See you. Bye.